My son-in-law said I should act my age and retire already. He didn't know I was buying his company. I never expected to teach him such an expensive lesson about respecting his elders, but sometimes life gives you the perfect opportunity to show someone that experience and wisdom shouldn't be dismissed so easily. If you're new to my channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to hear more stories about family members who learn the hard way that disrespect comes with consequences. And if you've been here before, you know that I never start a story unless there's a satisfying ending where justice is served. I'm 68 years old and spent my entire career building a successful investment portfolio after starting with almost nothing. My late wife and I raised our daughter Jessica to understand the value of hard work, but unfortunately, her husband Mark never seemed to grasp that concept. From the moment Jessica brought him home, I sensed something was off about him. He had this smug confidence that wasn't backed by any real accomplishment, the type of man who believed he deserved success without putting in the effort. When Jessica announced their engagement 6 years ago, I had my reservations but kept them to myself. My daughter's happiness meant everything to me, especially after losing her mother to cancer when Jessica was in college. So instead of voicing my concerns, I decided to support them however I could. That included paying for their extravagant wedding, $75,000 that Mark insisted they deserved, helping with the down payment on their house, $120,000 that they promised to pay back but never did, and even investing in Mark's business ventures when banks wouldn't touch them. The latest of these ventures was a tech consulting firm that Mark started 3 years ago. He had experience in the industry but lacked the business acumen to make it truly successful. Still, I invested $200,000 to help him get off the ground, believing it might finally be the thing that would give him some stability and maturity. How wrong I was. My career wasn't glamorous, but it was steady and profitable. I worked as a financial advisor for 40 years, helping hundreds of clients build wealth while carefully growing my own investments. My wife and I lived modestly, saving aggressively for retirement and Jessica's future. We paid for her entire college education, $150,000 at a prestigious university, without her taking a single student loan, something we were proud to provide. After my wife passed away, I threw myself into my work and my investments. I developed a reputation in business circles as someone with a keen eye for undervalued companies and promising startups. By the time I reached my mid-60s, my portfolio was worth several $1,000,000, not that anyone in my family knew the exact figure. I've always been private about my finances, believing that wealth should be managed quietly and responsibly. Mark came from a different philosophy entirely. He grew up in an upper-middle-class family where he never wanted for anything, yet somehow developed a sense that the world owed him more. He'd bounce between jobs, always convinced he was being undervalued or that his bosses were idiots who couldn't recognize his brilliance. Jessica fell for his charm and ambition, seeing potential that I feared wasn't actually there. Their relationship seemed happy enough on the surface, but I noticed troubling patterns. Mark would make decisions unilaterally, often ignoring Jessica's input. He'd spend extravagantly on himself, a new sports car, expensive golf clubs, designer clothes, while Jessica continued to drive her 10-year-old sedan. Whenever they visited, he dominated conversations, interrupting Jessica and dismissing her opinions with a wave of his hand. I tried to mentor Mark in business, offering advice based on my decades of experience. At first, he would listen politely, but as time went on, he became increasingly dismissive. "That's old-school thinking," he'd say, or "business is different now, you wouldn't understand." I backed off, not wanting to create tension, especially when Jessica announced she was pregnant with my first grandchild 3 years ago. My grandson Tyler became the light of my life. I started thinking seriously about retirement, not because I wanted to stop working, but because I wanted more time with him. I reduced my client list, but kept my hand in several investments, particularly enjoying the mentorship of younger entrepreneurs who actually valued my experience. Mark's consulting firm, EdgeTech Solutions, was struggling almost from the beginning. Despite my investment and connections I shared with him, he made a series of poor decisions. He spent too much on flashy offices instead of building his client base. He hired friends rather than qualified professionals. Yet whenever I gently suggested course corrections, he became defensive and angry. Last Thanksgiving, I overheard him complaining to his brother about me in what he thought was a private conversation. "The old man won't stop meddling in my business," he said. "He thinks because he had some success in the Stone Age that he knows how modern tech consulting works. I wish he'd just cash out and enjoy his retirement like normal grandparents. Jessica and I are next in line for that money anyway." I was hurt, but not entirely surprised. I'd suspected for some time that Mark saw me primarily as a source of funding and a future inheritance. Still, I kept my feelings to myself for Jessica and Tyler's sake, continuing to offer support when asked while pulling back on unsolicited advice. About 6 months ago, I learned through my industry connections that EdgeTech Solutions was in serious financial trouble. Mark had lost several major clients and was struggling to make payroll. Rather than addressing the underlying issues with the business model, he was seeking another round of funding to stay afloat. He hadn't approached me yet, and I wondered if his pride was finally preventing him from asking for more money. I was considering how I might help when Jessica called me in tears one evening. Tyler was asleep, and she finally felt free to talk about their financial situation. EdgeTech was on the verge of bankruptcy. Mark had taken out high-interest loans using their house, the house I had helped them buy, as collateral. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage, and Mark had been hiding the notices from Jessica. "Dad, I'm scared," she admitted. "Mark keeps saying a big client is just around the corner, but it's been just around the corner 4 months now. He refuses to downsize the office or let go of his friends who aren't bringing in any business. When I suggest it, he gets angry and says I don't understand business." My heart broke for my daughter. She had always been bright and capable, graduating with honors and starting a promising career that she put on hold to support Mark's dreams and raise Tyler. Now she was watching everything crumble while being told her input wasn't valuable. "Would you like me to talk to him?" I offered. "Maybe I could look at the books and suggest some restructuring." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "He's very sensitive about the business, Dad. He already thinks you don't respect his abilities. But maybe if you approached it carefully." I agreed to try, and Jessica arranged for me to come over for dinner the following evening under the pretense of discussing Tyler's education fund. When I arrived, the tension in the house was palpable. Mark was drinking more than usual, his typical bravado undercut by a nervous energy. After dinner, when Jessica took Tyler upstairs for his bath, I carefully broached the subject. "Jessica mentioned EdgeTech is facing some challenges right now. I have some experience with business turnarounds. Perhaps I could offer some perspective." Mark's face immediately hardened. "Did she put you up to this?" I told her everything is under control. "No one put me up to anything," I replied calmly. "I care about both of you and want to help if I can." "Help?" Mark laughed bitterly. "Like you helped by giving me the startup money with all those strings attached?" "Always checking in, always questioning my decisions." "There were no strings attached," I said, surprised. "I've only offered advice when asked." "Oh, please," he scoffed. "You've been waiting for me to fail from day one. Admit it, you never thought I was good enough for Jessica." I took a deep breath. "Mark, this isn't about my opinion of you. This is about your family's financial security. Jessica is worried, and from what I understand, there's good reason for concern." That's when he exploded. He stood up so quickly his chair fell backward, his face red with anger and humiliation. "You know what? I don't need financial advice from someone who should have retired years ago. You're holding onto your little client list and your board positions because you're afraid of becoming irrelevant. It's pathetic. You should act your age and retire already instead of trying to live vicariously through my business." Jessica had come downstairs during his outburst and stood frozen in the doorway, Tyler clutched in her arms, his eyes wide with fear at his father shouting. "Mark," Jessica gasped. "How could you speak to my father that way after everything he's done for us?" Mark turned to her, still fuming. "Oh, here we go, poor Jessica and her saint of a father. I'm so sick of hearing about how generous he is, how successful he is. If he's so brilliant with money, why does he live in that same modest house? Where's the yacht, the vacation homes? He's just a small-time financial advisor who got lucky with a few investments." I stood up slowly, keeping my voice level despite the anger and hurt I felt. I think it's best if I leave now. Jessica, call me tomorrow, please. As I walked to the door, Mark called after me. Yeah, go home and count your pennies, old man. Some of us are trying to build something meaningful in the real world. The drive home was a blur of emotions. I was furious at Mark's ingratitude and disrespect, heartbroken for my daughter and grandson, and, if I'm being honest, wounded by the dismissal of my life's work as lucky and insignificant. But beneath all that, a plan was already forming in my mind. The next morning, Jessica called, mortified and apologetic about Mark's behavior. He didn't mean it, Dad. He's just under so much pressure with the business failing. He was up all night feeling terrible about what he said. Was he? I asked, doubtful. Has he called to apologize himself? Her silence was answer enough. Jessica, I said gently, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you happy with Mark? Not just getting by, but truly happy. There was a long pause before she responded, her voice barely a whisper. I used to be. I don't know anymore. He's changed, Dad. Or maybe he was always this way and I couldn't see it. The way he spoke to you last night, that's how he speaks to me when no one's around. That was all I needed to hear. I want you and Tyler to come stay with me for a while, I said. Just to give you both some space to think. Mark would never agree to that, she said. He'd see it as me taking your side. Then don't present it that way, I suggested. Tell him you're coming to help me for a few weeks. Say I'm finally taking his advice to get my affairs in order for retirement. She agreed to the plan, and 3 days later, she and Tyler were settled into my guest rooms. Mark was too preoccupied with saving his failing business to put up much resistance, especially when Jessica framed it as temporary and related to my retirement planning. With Jessica and Tyler safely away from Mark's increasingly volatile moods, I set my plan in motion. First, I consulted with my attorney about Jessica and Tyler's financial protection. Then I reached out to a business contact who specialized in distressed company acquisitions. I need complete discretion on this, I told him over lunch. The company is EdgeTech Solutions. I want to know everything: their debt structure, client contracts, intellectual property, employee agreements, everything. And I want to know who holds their loans. My contact was puzzled. That's your son-in-law's company, isn't it? Why not just ask him for the information? Let's just say we have different perspectives on the company's future, I replied. And I'd prefer my involvement remain anonymous for now. Within a week, I had a complete picture of EdgeTech's situation, and it was even worse than I'd imagined. Mark had accumulated nearly $800,000 in business debt across multiple high-interest loans. The company had valuable contracts and intellectual property, but Mark's mismanagement was running it into the ground. 3 major clients were on the verge of canceling their contracts, which would essentially doom the business. I also discovered something that made my blood boil. Mark had been drawing an exorbitant salary while the company floundered, and had recently opened a separate bank account Jessica didn't know about. A little more digging revealed he'd been seeing one of his employees on the side, a young woman he'd hired as director of client relations, despite her lack of relevant experience. Armed with this information, I invited Mark to my house for a man-to-man talk. He arrived looking haggard, but still maintaining his air of superiority. Jessica and Tyler doing their charity work for the elderly, he asked with a smirk as he walked in. I ignored the jab. Sit down, Mark. We need to talk about EdgeTech. His smirk vanished. There's nothing to discuss. I've got a new investor lined up. Everything's going to be fine. Is that so? And does this investor know about the Hartman contract that's about to be canceled? Or the lawsuit that's being prepared by your former client Midstate Logistics for breach of contract? He paled visibly. How do you know about those? I make it my business to know things, Mark. It's how I've stayed successful for decades. I also know about Rachel in client relations and the separate account at First National. He jumped to his feet. You've been spying on me? What gives you the right? Sit down, I said firmly. I'm not finished. Something in my tone made him comply, though he perched on the edge of the sofa like he might bolt at any moment. You have 2 options, I continued. Option 1. I contact Jessica tonight and tell her everything I've discovered, including Rachel. I provide evidence of your mismanagement to your remaining clients. I notify the bank that you've been misrepresenting the company's finances on your loan applications. EdTech collapses, you face potential legal consequences, and your marriage likely ends. Mark's face contorted with anger. You vindictive old man. You've been waiting for a chance to ruin me. I haven't finished explaining your options, I said calmly. Option 2, you sign EdTech over to a holding company that's prepared to acquire all its assets and debts. This company will retain most of the current employees except for senior management. You'll walk away with no legal issues. You'll also sign a very generous divorce settlement that I've had drawn up, giving Jessica full custody of Tyler with reasonable visitation rights for you, plus the house free and clear. You expect me to give up everything I've built? To walk away with nothing? You're insane. He was on his feet again, pacing like a caged animal. Not nothing. You'll have your freedom, a clean financial slate, and the opportunity to see your son grow up instead of from behind a prison visiting room glass. And you won't have the burden of a father-in-law who should act his age and retire already. I let the familiar words hang in the air between us. Mark stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. The holding company, it's you, isn't it? You're buying EdTech. I smiled thinly. As you so eloquently pointed out, I should be focusing on retirement activities. I thought saving a viable business from an incompetent manager might be a nice hobby. I'll fight this, he threatened. You can't force me to sell. You're right, I can't. That's why these are options. But before you decide, you should know that the holding company has already purchased all of EdTech's outstanding loans. As of this morning, I own your debt, Mark. Every penny of it. And I'm calling those loans due immediately. The color drained from his face as the reality of his situation sank in. EdTech couldn't pay those loans. He couldn't pay those loans. Without an immediate cash infusion or debt forgiveness, the company would be forced into bankruptcy by week's end. This is blackmail, he whispered. No, Mark. This is business. Sometimes the person across the table has more leverage than you do. Sometimes they've been in the game longer and see moves you don't. Sometimes they've just got a better hand. I slid a folder across the coffee table to him. The paperwork is all here. Option 2 expires in 48 hours. Choose wisely. He left without another word, the folder clutched in his shaking hand. During the 48 hours I gave Mark to decide, I wasn't idle. I met with EdTech's key clients, assuring them that under new management, their contracts would be fulfilled with the highest quality service. I identified the valuable employees worth retaining and developed retention packages for them. I had my team prepare for either outcome, a smooth transition if Mark signed, or a strategic dismantling of EdTech for its valuable parts if he forced the bankruptcy route. I also sat down with Jessica and gently shared what I discovered about Mark's affair and the separate bank account. She was devastated but not entirely surprised. There were signs, she admitted tearfully. Late nights, unexplained expenses, passwords suddenly changed on accounts. I just didn't want to see it. You don't have to make any decisions right now, I assured her. Just know that whatever happens with Mark, you and Tyler will be secure. On the morning the ultimatum expired, Mark arrived at my house. He looked like he hadn't slept, but there was a resigned calm about him that suggested he'd come to terms with his situation. I'll sign, he said without preamble when I opened the door. But I want 3 changes to the agreement. I raised an eyebrow but gestured for him to continue. First, I want it on record that I'm selling voluntarily, not due to coercion. Second, I want a letter of recommendation for future employment. And third, I want your word that you won't tell Tyler about Rachel when he's older. He can know the marriage ended, but not that detail. He shouldn't grow up thinking his father is a complete villain. His request surprised me, particularly the last one. It was the first time he'd shown genuine concern for how Tyler might perceive him rather than just his own image. Agreed to all 3, I said. The paperwork already states the sale is voluntary. I'll provide a factual recommendation letter focusing on your technical knowledge. And I won't volunteer information about Rachel to Tyler. That's between you and Jessica anyway. We went to my attorney's office that afternoon. Mark signed everything without further objection. The company transfer, the divorce agreement, custody arrangement, everything. As he handed the pen back to the attorney, he looked at me with a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. You know, if you'd actually retire like a normal person, none of this would have happened, he said. I couldn't help but laugh. If I'd retired like a normal person, who would have saved you from criminal fraud charges? Who would keep EdgeTech's employees from losing their jobs? Sometimes experience and wisdom are worth more than youthful confidence, Mark. He had no response to that. The transition was surprisingly smooth. I installed a competent management team at EdgeTech, many of whom had been sidelined by Mark's preference for employing his friends. The company stabilized within months and began growing again. I took an advisory role only, stepping in for strategic decisions but leaving day-to-day operations to the professionals I'd hired. Mark moved to another state and, true to the agreement, didn't contest the divorce. Jessica and Tyler stayed with me for several months before moving back into their house, which was now fully paid off thanks to the settlement I'd negotiated. It's been a year since that confrontation in my living room. EdgeTech Solutions has doubled its client base and tripled its profitability. The employees who stayed are thriving under competent leadership, with proper training and advancement opportunities that Mark never provided. Jessica has returned to her career, starting a position at a marketing firm where her intelligence and creativity are valued. She's also begun dating again, cautiously but with a newfound confidence. Watching her reclaim her sense of self has been one of the most rewarding parts of this whole experience. Tyler, now 4, is thriving. He sees his father during scheduled visitations, and while those interactions are sometimes awkward, Mark seems to be making a genuine effort to be present and engaged as a parent, if not a husband. As for me, I've finally started that retirement Mark was so eager for me to begin. But it's on my terms, traveling with Jessica and Tyler, mentoring young entrepreneurs who actually value my input, and yes, keeping a watchful eye on EdgeTech's progress. Last month, I received an unexpected email from Mark. It was brief, but surprisingly sincere. I'm interviewing for a technical director position next week. They were impressed by your recommendation letter. I wanted to say thank you for that, and for keeping your word about everything else. The past year has been humbling. Maybe you were right about experience and wisdom. I wrote back a simple, good luck with the interview, but I found myself smiling as I hit send. Not because I'd won or because he'd suffered, but because maybe, just maybe, he'd learned something valuable from all this. The most satisfying revenge isn't about destroying someone who wronged you. It's about creating positive change from a negative situation. My son-in-law told me to act my age and retire already, not knowing I was buying his company. But what I really did was show him the value of the very experience and wisdom he had dismissed, and in the process, secured a better future for everyone involved, including him. Sometimes the best lessons come from the teachers you respect the least. And sometimes, just sometimes, those lessons actually sink in.